Hello. This is the first in a series of videos which we'll be posting on the Facebook page to support you with your triathlon training through the winter and into racing season next year, 2019. And today we are talking about bike test results. So you will have been in already and done a bike test on the Watt bike. You may not have been in already. You may be booked in the next couple of weeks. And just to explain, you come in and do a maximal aerobic test where we start at a low wattage, and then every minute we add 20 watts, and you have to hold 90 RPM until you can no longer hold 90 RPM and reach failure. And the last full minute that you complete is your maximal aerobic power score. Now, if you've done your test already, Nick will have sent you an Excel spreadsheet with all your results on, and I'm going to talk through those a little bit more and in a bit more detail, so you can just understand better what the test scores are and how it relates to you, and then you can use it to influence your training. So that first point I just made, the maximal aerobic power. You'll come in and do the bike test, increase every minute until failure, and you get a maximal aerobic power score. So let's just give us an example that your last full minute is 300 watts, and then you fail at the end of it and you can't hold 90 RPM. So 300 watts would be your maximal aerobic power. We'd then divide that by your body weight. So if you weigh 75 kilos, just to keep things simple, 300 divided by 75 is 4. So you would have 4 watts per kilo. So 300 watts on your last full minute on the test, 75 kilos, 4 watts per kilo. We tend to look at the watts per kilo rather than the overall wattage, because bigger people will always get higher wattage, which can be a bit off-putting for people who are smaller, like myself. And you see people posting on Facebook that they hit 400 watts on a test, and it doesn't really matter unless you know their size and their weight, because you'll get big guys at 95 kilos knocking out huge power outputs, but when they divide it by their body weight, the actual watts per kilo isn't that much better than yours. So the watts per kilo score, we say recommendation as a start point, you should be at 4 watts per kilo. So reaching 300 on the test for someone who weighs 75 kilos. And if you want to be performing well, you should be getting towards 5 watts per kilo. And then to give you an idea, if people who are finishing well up in their age group, towards the top end of their age group, they'd be at least 5.5 watts per kilo, pushing towards 6 watts per kilo if they're at the top end of their age group. So you can do the maths there. You know, if you want to do the figures on, right, what's 6 watts per kilo, then it's have a look at what your body weight is, multiply it by 6, and that's the wattage that you need to hit on your test to get to 6 watts per kilo. So that's just some ideas of, you know, where you stand, but we want everybody at 4 as a basic start point to get around the Ironman, pushing towards 5, and then for the better ones amongst you who want to, you know, try and do well, 5.5 to 6 watts per kilo is a figure, and that's a key figure that we're going to be looking at this year, the watts per kilo. So when you do the test, sometimes people get confused because they think, well, why are we doing a 10-minute test working at maximal aerobic power when I'm racing Ironman, which is a long, slow endurance event? And that's probably the worst mistake you can make, and it's a mistake that a lot of coaches make, that they think we're racing Ironman, and because we're racing Ironman, we need to do lots of long, slow stuff and get the miles in because it's an endurance event. And a lot of time people want to think that because they don't want to do anything painful and they want a coffee shop ride. But it'd be the worst thing you can do. And the reason is that on average, everybody will race Ironman at 65% of the maximal aerobic power. As an average, obviously there will be variations, but as an average figure, everybody will race Ironman at 65% of the maximal aerobic power. So if you look at someone reaching 300 watts, 65% of 300, that's the wattage that they'll push in an Ironman. If you reach 400 watts, 65% of 400, that's what you'll push in Ironman. If you reach 500 watts, 65% of 500, that's what you'll push in Ironman. And this is key, is that the guys who are faster than you, or the girls that are faster than you, it's not because they're pushing harder. So pretty much everybody's pushing at 65% of their maximal aerobic power. But obviously 65% of 500 is a lot more than 65% of 200. So that's where the differences occur between the faster ones and the slower ones. So if you can raise your maximal aerobic power, so if you've done a test and you're at the moment, your last full minute was at 250, If you can get up to 300, 320 by the time you reach Ironman, then you'll be racing at 65% of 320 and not 65% of 250. And that's really key. So people ask, what's the best pace for Ironman? What should I be riding Ironman at? And there will be a pace. If I said to you, look, get on your bike and go out and ride, just do a couple of hours and ride at a pace that you think is sustainable for Ironman, then using your perceived effort and your experience, your judgment, you would set off at a pace and think, yeah, this isn't too hard. I'm not going too slow, it's a steady pace, but I don't feel like it's too hard, and I feel like I could hold this for 112 miles. So I feel this is about right for me to do Ironman. Well, that would be roughly 65% of your maximum aerobic power. You'd probably be able to work that out yourself. So just by your own judgment, if you went out and rode at what you think is right, you'd probably naturally find 65% of your maximum aerobic power. Okay. So your maximum aerobic power will in effect determine your speed on the day. So some people will set off and ride at 14 mile an hour and think this feels about right. And some people will set off and ride at 20 mile an hour and think this feels about right. But generally, it'll always be about 65% of your maximum aerobic power. Now, so your maximum aerobic power test will determine how fast, therefore, you're riding an Ironman. That's the key thing that you need to understand here. Whether you can keep that pace going, so you might set off and think, yeah, this feels about right, but you might get to 80 miles and realise that it wasn't and you're absolutely blowing. Whether you can keep it going or not will be determined by the endurance work that you do. So I'm not suggesting for 1 second that you don't need to go and do longer rides. You will need to do longer rides, and there is a time and a place for that. So your maximum aerobic power test, what you reach on the watt bike on our lab test here, that will determine the pace that you feel is right for Ironman. That will determine how fast you ride in Ironman. The mileage that we do later on in the programme and the longer rides, that will determine whether you are able to keep that pace going for the full 112. So when you come in and do the watt bike test, we'll do the maximum aerobic power and we'll do watts per kilo. And if you've got your test results, both of those should be on your sheet. So remember, we just said 4 watts per kilo as a start point, 5 if you want to be getting somewhere, 5.5 to 6 is the people who are at the top end of their age group. What else do we get from the test? So we calculate your zones for heart rate and for power. If you've got access to a watt bike or a power meter, then you can do a lot of your sessions based on power and it tells you what your output is. If you've got a heart rate monitor, heart rate is okay for zone 1, zone 2, zone 3 it's generally alright, zone 4 it's going AWOL, zone 5, 6 and 7 are waste of time. And to be honest, with our plan over the winter, a lot of the stuff is quite short and hard, and a heart rate monitor is a complete waste of time. It doesn't work. And it doesn't work because if I'm asking you to do 30 seconds of maximal effort, you'll have finished that 30 seconds before your heart rate's even woken up. So your heart rate doesn't react fast enough. So anything above zone 3, heart rate's very sketchy and is a bit of a waste of time. So you're better just going off perceived effort. So if I say do it really hard or do it maximal, then do it really hard or maximal. And if you've got access to a power meter, then that's another benefit with a power meter, that you can at least see what you're scoring, what you're producing during the test. Okay. We do another test on the watt bike as well, which is a sprint test, and you just go all out for 10 seconds and see what you can produce in a very short period of time. And the reason we do that is to measure your leg strength. So leg strength is quite important for cycling. It isn't important for running, but it is important for cycling, and that's why a lot of runners struggle often to come across to cycling, because they don't have that strength in the quads to drive on the pedals. So when we do a watt bike test, when we're increasing it every minute, what we're actually doing is we're increasing by adding more resistance. So we're putting more resistance, more weight on in effect, every single minute until your legs fail. So there is a strength element involved in your legs. So when we do the sprint test, we're trying to work out what your basic strength is. And you'll have a sprint test score, and then it'll be worked out also as watts per kilo, same as before, but for the sprint test we do it. So what did you sprint in that 10 seconds? What was your peak figure in the 10 seconds? What does that work out at watts per kilo? And as an average, 13 watts per kilo for a sprint is probably right. So a 100 kilogram person should be sprinting 1,300 watts. So 13 watts per kilo. 100 kilograms is heavy, isn't it? It just don't do the maths. So yeah, 13 watts per kilo for the sprint, and we said earlier on 4 watts per kilo watts per kilo for the aerobic test. So one of the common things we got on the bike test is people doing the aerobic test, the one that increases every minute, and they fail on the aerobic test and then say, I feel all right, heart and lungs, but it's just my legs packing in. I can't deal with the resistance. My legs are not strong enough, but I feel okay cardiovascular wise. And so you get that with runners who come to cycling. Cardiovascular wise, I feel okay, but it's just my legs, and my legs are just packing in, and they just don't have that strength. So we're trying to look at all aspects of your physiology and work out what it is. And if your strength is lacking, then that's something that we need to work on. So you will get people who do the aerobic test, the ramp test of 1 minute increments, and they'll get to a decent score. So let's say that we get people coming in and they get 4.5 watts per kilo on their aerobic test. But on the sprint test, they get a very low score. They might just be at like 9 watts per kilo on the sprint test. And obviously the sprint test should be a lot higher because you're only sprinting for a matter of seconds. And if you find yourself in that boat where your sprint test is quite poor, and you'll know this when you get results through, but your aerobic test is okay, I'll give you a classic example of this, a kind of person that they'll find that when they're on a long, draggy climb, they're okay. They've got good aerobic power to weight, and they can ride quite steadily up a long, long hill. But if they hit a short, steep hill, they don't have that oomph, that power, just to, they've got to reach for the gear shifter straight away and change into the small chain ring. They can't just sit in the saddle and power over the top of a little rise. So they lack strength, no acceleration, no short-term power on short, steep climbs. But they're quite happy on very, very long climbs, just riding away at one pace for a period of time. So again, like I say, classics with this is runners who come to cycling, and especially female runners who come to cycling. You'll get where they'll be very light and they'll be able to ride for a long, long time up a steady climb at a decent pace and good power to weight, but that strength test is often quite poor. And with cycling, especially if you're on relatively lumpy courses like UK and things like that, you really need that ability to be able to produce that little bit of force. So from the strength test, what we can work out is, is that something you're lacking? Is that something we need to work on? And often it's the strength which has caused them to fail in the aerobic test. That's why their legs went, because they just didn't have couldn't deal with the resistance as we were increasing it every minute. So, what else do you get from the test? Fat burning. It shows you whether you're burning fat or not. People become quite obsessed with this. Fat burning is really important for endurance because you've only got a limited amount of carbohydrate in your body. And if you can burn more fat, then you can save your glycogen stores, your carbohydrate stores, and you're less likely to run out of energy, keep a more steady, even keel, rather than this bonking where your glycogen levels drop and you have to slow right down. So we always want people to burn a little bit more fat, ideally. And you'll get your RQ values on the sheet, which will indicate how much fat that your body's burning. So let's say you look at that and your body's not burning fat. What is it you need to do? First of all, don't panic. It's a long way off. And we don't need to, and that's not something that particularly we want to focus on at the moment, the fat burning. We want to focus on maximal aerobic power. But the natural reaction for most people is you need to go and do long, slow stuff. Lots of long, slow stuff, and that's good for burning fat. But the reason why you're not burning fat may well be because your maximal aerobic power or strength is very poor. And I'll explain why this happens. You have slow twitch fibers and fast twitch fibers in your body, and the slow twitch burn fat and the fast twitch don't. So if you're just using slow twitch, you'll burn fat. If you switch to fast twitch, then you won't burn fat. So if your strength is poor and you get on the watt bike and you start doing your ramp test, and every minute we're increasing it, as we said earlier, some people just don't have the strength in the legs and they're finding it very, very hard. So very early in the test, they're struggling with the resistance. And because they're struggling so much because of their lack of strength, they start switching to fast twitch fibers. And as soon as they do that, the fat burning scores just become very poor and they switch to carbohydrate. So it's not that they can't burn fat. They can burn fat if they stay at a very low wattage and just keep spinning along. But as soon as we increase the resistance, they're not strong enough, so they start engaging all the fast twitch fibers and then the fat burning disappears. So it may well be that if your strength is quite poor, that's probably why your body's not burning fat, because you're switching rather than because you need to go and do long, slow stuff. You actually need to do very short, hard stuff. And we saw that last year with a lot of people. We were doing very short, hard stuff over the winter, and then they came back and retested after 8 weeks, 16 weeks, and the fat burning had completely changed, and they were burning loads more fat, and yet they hadn't done a single long, slow ride. So that proves it was due to this lack of strength and not due to a lack of long, slow mileage. And people become obsessed with thinking, I've got to go and do the long, slow stuff. And the reality is with the training plan, if you go out and do the long, slow stuff, what actually happens when you do lots of long, slow stuff is your maximal score, your maximum aerobic power will come down. Because if you're not using it, you're going to lose it. So if you do lots of long, slow stuff, your maximum aerobic power comes down. And then when you turn up on Ironman day and you're riding at 65% of your maximum aerobic power, it's even slower than it was the year before, because your maximum aerobic power score has come down because you spent too much time doing long, slow stuff. So our training in general with the bike, well, this time of year we're going to focus on swim and bike. We're still going to run, but just do the right things with running, but we're not going to overload the running at all. We're going to focus on bike, and we do what's called a reverse pyramid. So the traditional training programs for the 1950s and 60s where they originated from. Let's do base in the winter, long, slow stuff, and then we get faster and faster as the season approaches. We switch that round, it's a reverse pyramid. So what we're going to do is lots of very short, intense stuff in the short term to work on strength, bike strength, and work on your maximum aerobic power. And the one key thing we need to see improve over the next 8 weeks and 16 weeks, you need to be coming back here scared in 8 weeks' time doing your bike test that you haven't improved. It needs to hang over your head. Because what you need to do is hammer those turbos that we set on the schedule, and we need to see improvement in 8 weeks, and we need to see another improvement in 16 weeks. Not as interested in the running for the time being, just in the bike. And we've got to get the maximum aerobic power score as high as we can by the time we come into spring, and tackle that strength issue if that's an issue for you. Get the maximum aerobic power as high as you can, so your Ironman pace, 65% of that figure is as fast as we can get it to by next spring. And then when the weather changes, then we'll start adding the mileage, and then we start going out and doing the long distance to give you the endurance as you build up and approach race day. So we do very short, hard stuff now, increase your race speed, and then we're going to do the endurance later so you can sustain that race speed. And that's how it's going to work. So your key sessions will be your 2 turbo sessions. And obviously there's options here to do 3 swim, 3 bike, 3 run a week, and people will do different amounts. But on the bike, it's absolutely critical for 16 weeks that those 2 turbo sessions are done at absolutely 100%. Irrelevant of any other swim, bike or run sessions, those 2 turbo sessions are key. You never miss them. If you do miss them, you skip another session so you can put it back into the week. And in 8 weeks' time, you're going to come back and bike test again, and we have to see an improvement in 8 weeks. And then in 16 weeks' time, you'll come back on your bike again, and we need to see another improvement in 16 weeks. Feeling under pressure? I hope you are.